Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This September 9th, 2021 meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck?
Here.
Councilor Wynn?
Here.
Wendland?
Here.
Burdick? Here. Raff?
I am here.
And Boop?
Here.
And Mans? Here.
Okay, we'll recognize we also have a city manager, Martha Bennett, city attorney, Jason Luce, and our city recorder, Ms. Linder, up at the dais with us. And now will everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. First item on the agenda tonight is public comment, and we have Jeff Harris. Welcome. Hello, Mr. Harris. Please come forward. Have a seat. I know, yeah.
Well, you can. No,
Yeah.
Okay,
Good to have you here.
all righty.
Please start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, good evening. As you just heard, my name is Jeff Harris. I live at 101 5th Street here in the Evergreen neighborhood. My wife and I moved here April of last year, and we are very, very happy to be residents here of Lake Oswego. Very happy and very pleased to live in this community. We are the last house on the left on 5th Street before you get to the railroad tracks and cross over to Cabana Lane. So, which is one of the reasons I'm talking to you here tonight. This afternoon I sent, or at least I tried to send you an email with a sampling of some of the correspondence and some photos that we've had with the city thus far. Did you folks get that or no? Or maybe you haven't had a chance to look at it. I just did it this afternoon.
The email, I don't think the attachment.
So I discovered the attachments are created in Pages, and so we'll get them. I'll work with Mr. Pay to get them open. They work great on my iPhone, but they don't.
Yeah,
on any
I'm sorry.
PC device.
Maybe we can get them in PDF. I did, because I got that information. My wife tried to send it again. I did print out a copy of that. So if I could, I'll just give that to you then. But that would be great. You let me know if I could try to resend it with a PDF. I didn't realize it was just in Pages.
We can do it. I now know about the file, what kind of file it is. We can open it.
Okay, that's great. So quick background. Last summer, shortly after we had moved in, I read that the city was going to complete the repair and the resurfacing of the streets in our neighborhood, I guess, which had started, the year before. When looking online at the plan, I noticed that our section of 5th Street was not included. And so I called to find out what was going on and basically asked what's wrong with us. And I was directed to Mr. Stefan Brodus, who informed me that it wasn't going to be paved because there is a storm water drainage problem there. And they didn't want to pave the street and then have to tear it up again to fix the problem underneath. However, when I asked about, well, what was the plan for that, he said there currently was no plan to fix that, which struck me as a little bit odd at the time. But he did readily acknowledge that there is a significant storm drain water problem there. Now, this was in the summer. I had yet to experience that problem until last winter. And talking to several of the long-term neighbors, my neighbors that have been there long-term, 25 years, they say this is a problem that has long existed and, in their opinion, long been ignored by the city. And they just kind of shrug their shoulders at it. So basically, I'm here to respectfully suggest that it's time to deal with this. We were, last winter, as I mentioned, we experienced what it means to live at that place. For those of you who are not familiar, this is the very bottom of Fifth Street. So Fifth Street comes down, and then in front of our house, then we are the last house before the railroad tracks. So the railroad track, the road goes up for the railroad track there, which creates a dam. There's no way to mitigate the water coming down from Fifth Street. It just pools. So, and significantly, last year we had water that was 6 to 8, in some places maybe 10 feet into our property from the street, 4 inches deep on our walkway, on our lawn, on our driveway. The mailman, Kyle, who's great, to get us our mail in the mail slot by our door, has to trudge through 4 inches of water in the winter, which, I don't know, if I were him, I would not be excited about that. But both my wife and I are walkers. That's one of the reasons we moved to this neighborhood. We love being able to walk everywhere. But last winter, there were days when, and our lot is probably about 100 feet wide. There were days last year where we had about an 18-inch space on one corner of the driveway where we could walk to the street without trudging through 4 inches of water. So,
Well, Mr. Harris, let me just stop you there.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you being here. I'm just looking at we have a document called the CIP, our Capital Improvement Plan.
Right.
The good news is that we are, this year funding, well, in this CIP, not this year, but $8.3 million in stormwater projects. And this document is online, accessible to everyone. The bad news is there's always more projects, whether it's in stormwater, roads, or otherwise, that require more funding and resources than the city has, right? We collectively as taxpayers. So that's always the struggle. It's not that the city is ignoring a project, just simply that the need is always greater than the amount of money we have to fix it.
sure.
I do see the Fifth Street and Lake Bay drainage improvements as a project. However, it is in the unfunded column, but we will follow up with you perhaps on what the plan is, and we really appreciate.
Well, I appreciate that. Just one last comment, please. This affects way more than me. As many of you know, Fifth Street is a thoroughfare for anybody around the bay coming through, and it's a virtual parade of people, and that doesn't go away in the winter. And I was concerned because with the water, that street is an old street, it's crowned,
Right.
and there's enough water that it actually almost meets in the middle. We got people, babies going down and stuff, and cars and people trying to get around, and everybody's getting wet. I think it's actually a dangerous situation at this point that should be mitigated. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you very
so
much. We appreciate you coming here. Thank you. Okay. Next on the agenda, we're going to move into our first study session, which is on the American Rescue Plan Act funding options process. And City Manager Bennett is going to start us off.
And I'm going to ask if Finance Director Cross and Ms. Rooney would just come up to the table just in case you have questions. I'm not asking you to actually pick projects tonight. I'm asking you to provide some general overall guidance and a sort of a high-level policy decision about distribution. And actually, the comment that you just heard is a perfect segue to this conversation. So I think you all know that in March of this year, the Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act, which I'll now refer to as ARPA. And it was signed into law by President Biden. And there were literally billions and actually trillions of dollars allocated for various COVID relief programs through the American Rescue Plan Act. There were $350 billion distributed to local governments throughout our country. So I'm here to talk about the allocation that's going to come to the city of Lake Oswego. Some communities in our state and country got a direct distribution from the federal government if they were over 50,000 people, or if they otherwise were what's known as CDBG eligible communities, they got a direct distribution. The rest of us all got a distribution through the state of Oregon. When I first wrote this memo back in July, I had no idea when that was coming. I'm pleased to tell you that we actually got the first 50% of our funds at the end of August. So we're now actually ready to talk about what you all want to do with those funds. Under the ARPA and the guidance, the regulations that implement the program, local governments can spend the funds that they receive, and Lake Oswego's share is $8.8 million on 4 categories of activities. The first is to respond to the public health emergency and its negative economic impacts. Sorry, for some reason I can't talk tonight, which is, as you know, quite unusual. The second category is to replace revenue that was lost as a result of the pandemic. The third category is premium pay for employees that were under severe stress during the pandemic. And the last is for infrastructure, and it's specifically limited to 3 categories of infrastructure: water, wastewater, and broadband. I'm going to outline those the categories in a later discussion, but I want to make sure we all cover the fact that we cannot spend the funds to do certain things. So first of all, we cannot spend the funds to offset tax cuts. In other words, you can't reduce the amount of taxes you collect by spending these funds. You cannot deposit them into a pension fund or to a rainy day fund. So in other words, we cannot reserve these funds for future expenditures. You can't use it to pay off debt service, to pay out legal settlement, or to use matching funds. And this is particularly important because some of the things that we want to do, we might do through grant programs, and you can't use these funds to match other grant programs. And then you can't use it sort of on general infrastructure unless it qualifies as revenue replacement. So I recall the very first call I got when we found out that ARPA was coming was from a counselor that you all know and love who cares a lot about bridges, former counselor. And at the time, we had to have a discussion about the fact that except for revenue replacement, we can't spend these funds on transportation infrastructure. However, I'm going to cover in a second, we actually had a lot of revenue loss under the formula, and you can ask Sean all the questions you want about how we calculated that, because I couldn't explain it if I tried. But we're going to actually have a lot of spending that qualifies as revenue replacement. So with all these caveats in mind, we sat down as a staff and talked about where would these funds do the most good for the Lake Oswego community. And we recommend that you consider 3 of the categories that are allowed under ARPA. And those 3 categories are the revenue loss category. And this is probably the most flexible funds under the American Rescue Plan Act, and so I will say that I also recommend that you maximize the amount that you can allocate to revenue replacement, because you have the greatest amount of flexibility over those funds. The second category I recommend you pursue are the category of responding to the public health emergency, but specifically, I think that you really want to respond to the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. And the third category, I think of as what's left over. I recommend that you spend on water and wastewater infrastructure, in particular water infrastructure based on what we learned during the ice storm earlier in this year. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly cover sort of my thought process for all of you. This is really your decision as a council in terms of, are these the right categories? Are these the right amounts? But based on what you tell us today, the 3 of us will go back and develop a plan to move ahead. So the first category is revenue loss. And as I say, I'm recommending that you maximize the amount that you spend on revenue loss because it is the most flexible category. But even under revenue loss, there are restrictions. So even though it's flexible, it's still restricted. It's restricted to transportation infrastructure, modernization of cybersecurity, health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, and the provision of public safety services. As you're all aware, we have over $200 million of unfunded road, pedestrian, and bicycle projects, and actually I'm sure Ms. Rooney could say how many stormwater improvement projects that we have that are also unfunded. And so the maximum amount you can allocate to this category, we estimate at $7.1 million. So all I'm trying to say is $7.1 million is a drop in the bucket of your unfunded need in the city of Lake Oswego. And then I'm going to drop down and say within that category, I recommend that you prioritize 3 specific types of things. The first is high priority or urgent transportation projects. In particular, the 2 that I've identified for you are the North Shore Bridge. You'll see there's quite a range, but this was obviously a project that we had not anticipated and is quite urgent to get completed to restore traffic flow to the neighborhood. But you'll also see the big range between an estimated $500,000 to $4 million, depending on what we hear from the engineers, and you are scheduled to hear from the engineers on October 5th. The second project I recommend you accelerate is Lakeview Boulevard, and this is in the funded category, but quite on point, the earlier testimony. If you know Lakeview Boulevard, you know it has a deficient stormwater infrastructure, and because it's I believe, a collector on our system, it carries quite a bit of community traffic. It also is a major pedestrian and bicycle route through our community, and so you could solve a storm drain problem, solve a road problem, and solve a pedestrian and bicycle program, which is very in line with council's goals. The second thing I recommend is that you set aside some of the funds for infrastructure, the infrastructure elements of other projects that appear on your council goals list. There are several projects out there in space that have probably significant, and Erica, you're going to help me use the right word, street front improvements that are going to be required for their completion. And the two that come immediately to mind for me are the Recreation and Aquatic Center, which will have significant street front improvements. And also what we know is going to be coming from Habitat for Humanity, which is a 23-unit townhouse project on Boones Ferry Road. So if I were to, so I suggest you think about setting aside some of these funds for that. And then last but not least, there are two council goal projects that right now have zero funding identified. They're both transportation related. It feels like the first phase of both of those projects would be a good use of these funds. Those two that I identified as the project to sort of envision the future of McVeigh and Stafford. I know we've heard a lot from the Palisades Neighborhood Association lately about the concerns that they have about the city's projects on Stafford Road and McVeigh. I think all of you who try to ever make a left turn onto McVeigh know that this is an urgent problem, and if you ever walk or ride your bicycle on McVeigh, you'll know that it's not a really welcoming or safe environment. And then the other project that you've identified that has no money associated with it is the next phase of Boones Ferry Road, so phase 2 of Boones Ferry Road. So that, I think, will easily spend $7.1 million. What I would recommend to you is that we not actually pick the projects tonight, but rather, if you like this thinking, that Ms. Rooney and I come back to you after we know more about the North Shore Bridge with a proposed list of projects. I would also say to you that my next recommendation is if it turns out the North Shore Bridge costs on the lower end of the spectrum, that you then direct the money to the next priorities on your Safe Routes to Schools project list. So that's category 1.
I like it.
Okay.
I have a quick question on
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
How did we calculate the 7.1?
So I'm so glad you asked.
So it's based on the fiscal year 18-19, and that year we just got a lot of one-time funds coming in. So that was our base year. And so it wasn't that we were out of a lot of money in fiscal year 19-20 and so far in 2021. It's just that year we got almost an extra $1 million in the Comcast settlement for the property taxes.
Right.
There was, I don't know, I brought the list.
So just a comparison between
Yeah,
the base year and the-
basically, that's what it was. And then I had to put it into calendar year. So while we were doing well fiscal year to fiscal year, it became quite apparent that our building area for those fees, we did really well at the end of 19, our fiscal year 19, at the beginning of fiscal year 20. So for calendar year 19, we did really well, but for calendar year 20, it was a little light. So I think there was about $1.6 million difference between when you, and then SDCs, a couple of projects came in, so they were like $2.1 million difference. And so basically it was our base year that we got to do. We had all these one-time monies coming in, and that just became our base, so every year after that. And the 7.1 is just the first year of the calendar year. We get to do it for calendar year 21, 22, and 23 as well. So in theory, unless it's all allocated now, you could and might be able to use all of it, all $8.8 million toward revenue replacement. I only say that because our base year that we're using, which was fiscal year 18-19, there was just so many one-time funds coming into it.
But we don't have to recalculate. Like
No.
if the future years are,
Yeah,
better. Then,
I think I have to report and calculate it anyways, but.
okay. Okay, thank you.
I think what Sean just said, though, is it's quite safe to assume that 1.1 qualifies. And so if you want to allocate more to revenue replacement type projects, it sounds like you have the discretion as policymakers to do that. I'll explain why I didn't recommend that in a second, because I do think there's needs in the other two categories, and so I actually, even though you could, I wouldn't go there. Except for I just said I'd maximize it, but I would maximize it based on what we know now.
To the next thing, sure, okay.
Okay, the second category, oh wait, I'm sorry, do you have any more questions on that? On the revenue replacement before I move
not on
on
the
to the
revenue.
second category?
Great.
The second category I'm recommending is that you think carefully about how we address the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. And there's two categories where I feel there's been impacts that we haven't been able to deal with yet throughout. In the past, we've dealt with some of the impacts, but not all of them. The first category is essentially our tourism-related nonprofits, and also just I wouldn't even call them tourism. I probably did in the staff report, but the hospitality related nonprofits, the ones that support Lake Oswego's, the people coming to here to spend money, essentially.
The arts and culture.
Largely the arts and culture, but and I think many of you know that when the pandemic hit, we cut the tourism grant program entirely. So for 2 years in a row, we haven't made any grants to any of these nonprofits that attract visitors to Lake Oswego, and most of them need support, and most of them have businesses that sort of rely on the activity that they bring to town for part of their business plan. So the other category I'm recommending that we deal with is the folks who provide direct assistance to people in need, because I do think there's still unaddressed social service need in our community, and we do have a nonprofit community that's quite good at delivering that. So I'm recommending that you allocate $600,000 for 3 rounds of grants under the program. That's obviously a number you guys have some discretion over, and we can talk about that if you want to, but it felt like a realistic amount of money for us to grant given our history with grant programs. If you like that recommendation, I recommend you form an ad hoc committee to develop the grant program and to recommend a list of grants to you. And I recommend you appoint folks from the Tourism Advisory Committee, partly because they haven't had anything to do in the last couple of years, from the Budget Committee, and from the DEI Committee, because I think they might be able to help us think about how do we make sure we reach the folks who are in most need in the community, and then one of you to serve on that committee. If you like that, I'd love to get that going as fast as we can and to try to roll out the first round of grants before the end of the year. And then the last category I recommend is that you allocate the balance, which is around $1 million, to the third category, water, sewer, and broadband, with the highest priority being addressing the need for redundant power at the river intake and also at the water treatment plant. I think that will easily cost $1 million. And so you'll probably still also have to supplement with water rate revenue. Maybe it won't, but I think it probably will if you really want to have a redundant system at both of those facilities. The last thing I should have said earlier is that there's a time limit on these dollars. We have to have made a decision about how we've had to obligate them. That essentially means they have to be under contract by the end of 2024, and they have to be completely spent by the end of 2026. So there are some projects that are really complex that probably are outside of that time horizon. All right, I am done talking for now.
Okay, we have some questions for you from the council members. We'll start with our remote counselor, Raph. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I miss you all. Glad to see you virtually. Wish I was there.
That is too big on
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. City Manager Martha Bennett, thank you for the presentation and the great work on this and your team. Couple questions for you. So with the $600,000 going to nonprofits, I would just like to throw out that I think one of the biggest drivers of tourism to Lake Oswego is our great small businesses, restaurants, and shops that I would like to advocate that we try to find. I'm not going to pretend like I know the solution to this. I'm just going to advocate that we try to find a way to help them out financially after with some of this money, as well as some of the nonprofits. I think they both groups do a great job of attracting people to Lake Oswego. Second point I had is, if we have any money left over from the large gap of projected expenditures for the North Shore Bridge, I would advocate that we try to fund some of the projects around getting safe routes to schools for our kids. For those of you who have been watching the last couple of weeks of school in the school district, you'll notice this week they've been having a bus issue, and so, you know, making sure we kind of get ahead of things. I think as we also want to encourage kids to walk to school and not use transportation, I think it's important for us to create systems for them to get to school, and therefore bus shortages wouldn't be a problem. I know it's a unique problem, but who knows if it's going to continue to happen. So I would advocate for that as well. The final point I would make is, I like the idea of allocating $1 million, $1.1 million to water redundancy. I would just caution us as a group to make sure that whatever we spend money on, if it can't get the job done completely with the money we're spending, let's make sure that we're putting that money towards projects that we know and confident that we can have the funding to finish it. I would hate to spend $1 million on something like this, and then when the money's gone, we don't have the money to finish the job. So those are my 3 comments. Thanks for the time.
Okay, thank you. But to sort of follow up on that, what is the total cost of the, retrofitting the plant to accept the generator?
Mayor and Councilors, Erica Rooney, City Engineer. So we don't have that number yet. We're about halfway through the study phase. Okay. We hired consultants earlier this, beginning of summer, I believe it was. And we're about halfway through identifying what types of options will be available, and now we're going to put some cost to that. So we don't have a number for you yet. But to answer Councilor Raff's comment about be sure that there's enough water funds available to supplement that if necessary so that we finish the job. I'm confident we could make that happen by making some small adjustments to timing on other projects that aren't as critical at this time. That'd be, as a minimum, we'd be able to do that quite easily.
Okay, very good. Councilor Mance.
Thank you. I have a question on Lakeview Boulevard. Is that south of South Shore or north of South Shore that we're doing the work? I'm trying to think of the parameter of it.
Great. So this part of Lakeview would be from Bryant up to the roundabout at Iron Mountain. So it's the one
at Iron Mountain. Okay.
Crosses over the railroad tracks.
Yep.
Is on the south side of the railroad tracks for
South
quite a
side
bit
of the
of it.
railroad tracks, but north side of South Shore. Okay, I got it. My thoughts on all of this are, thank you very much for staff for putting together the portfolio of items. I think it's really super balanced. I agree with every part of it. I like the idea that we are going to be looking at infrastructure projects, as that falls into the category of what we can spend these monies on. I too have to agree that anything that we can do on safe routes to school and pathways would be fabulous, should there be monies left over from the bridge. But yeah, great work, everyone. This is super balanced and really nice.
That's great. Okay. Councilor Boop.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Martha, for the relevance of your exposition of all this. I think we should, I agree with everything. I support really your recommendation, but I would like to join Councilor Raff to fund the safe route to school, because it's the ARPA was also talking about reopening of schools, and like he said, and it might be for a long time that buses, we don't know. It can be that the bus can continue, but then there will be always problem for our children to go to school. And education is a fundamental aspect of our communities. When we have money, I always want that we have some share for education. So I would love that we start some of the project. It was our vision. And also, I'm sure Mrs. Rooney had listened to Mr. Harris about their concern. I don't know if this fund can participate in helping the community member to solve their problem. Other than that, I agree totally with, I would move to approve that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilor Wendland?
In general, I'm totally supportive of this. I guess my question to you is, are there any trade-offs that we don't know about that somebody might be advocating for that are not on this list that we should know about before we, I mean, it's like anything else. We have 100 projects that we all love and like and would support, but we have money for 10.
Yeah, so we've definitely had inquiries from community groups and in particular parties asking for a direct allocation. And that's part of the reason I recommend a grant process so that it's a fair and level playing field. To Councilor Rapp's question earlier about business assistance, the good news is he did share with me the question, and I went and looked at ARPA, and there's actually many programs in ARPA that are direct assistance to businesses, including $28 billion for restaurant revitalization, so that goes direct to those industries. So I'm not going to tell you there aren't people out there who are hoping for an allocation, because there certainly are, but I think the fairest way to do it is to put together criteria and an application process. The other thing that I would make sure you all know, and Sean could talk about this more eloquently than I, is that nonprofits that receive funds are going to have to track the funds in a way that's consistent with the regulations. And so not every group or association out there who might be interested in cash actually has the organizational capacity to administer a federal grant. Mm-hmm. And so, I know I've been involved with, and many of you have been involved with, times where you got a grant and you wished that you hadn't, because the administrative headache and overhead was actually higher than the benefit that you got from the grant. So we'll want to work with folks who understand how these funds have to be administered, and that also needs to be incorporated into the grant process. So have we had direct requests? Absolutely. But I think that the fairest way to make those decisions is to have criteria and process.
And so from the infrastructure projects that you're talking about, those are the top things that and I agree with everyone.
Well, apart from North Shore Bridge, essentially
Right.
we did a test against council goals. I mean, what we did in terms of the recommendation was, which are these infrastructure projects that most clearly advance goals that you all articulated back in January? So, and when we bring you the plan, if you don't feel like, we'll bring you the goals back to you so you see them again, so you remember what they are. But if you don't think that's true, then obviously I would say council is the place where you might make those adjustments, with the exception of North Shore Bridge.
Right.
Which obviously became unfunded urgent project.
Right. Then I guess my only other comment is I would put 2 council liaisons on there instead of just one. I mean, just so that we can have maybe a more richer discussion and input, so that we've got everybody there. So, but thank you, great work, and thank you, federal government, for giving us some money.
Thank you, Councilor Wynn. Councilor Wynn?
Oh, thank you. So I'll just talk about these infrastructure projects. So I think we've talked about some of these before, but knowing that there's some plans in Congress to fund some additional infrastructure, are there infrastructure projects that we can identify that maybe we can, these funds are not going to, for example, wastewater treatment plant, that's not going to be enough to do any of this stuff. But are there ways we can use pieces of this and and leverage that with additional investments? Is that
They
prohibited?
can't use these funds to match other funds.
Can't.
So, we're all, I think, very hopeful that there'll be a federal infrastructure package. But as I said before, you have, just with roads and pathways and bike lanes, you have $200 million of unfunded projects. So I would say to you that we'll work from your CIP. You've really already identified and prioritized the projects, and so we'll work from that CIP in the event that there is a distribution that comes from a federal infrastructure package.
Okay. But by using these funds on any of these other infrastructure projects, would that bar us from getting the additional funding from Congress?
Depending on how they allocate it. And I can't tell you how they allocate it. If it's transportation money allocated through the MPO, then really we'll have to compete with all the other jurisdictions inside the port. And I expect that's how the transportation dollars will be allocated. So
So you don't think there's 200 million?
just sitting out there, check. If there was.
Or 192 million?
That's just the transportation unfunded need. We can go talk about stormwater, water, and wastewater later if you want to see a big number.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Burdick.
So this kind of is a follow-up question to one that John had and that you brought up regarding the grants. And that there are some nonprofits that might not have the ability to kind of actually do all the paperwork and everything that's required. Is there anything we can do to help some of those groups? Because I would hate to see a group that's in need not be able to receive it because they don't have maybe the knowledge and so I'm not sure if there's a way that we can give guidance or anything that we could do. But it would be nice if there is something that we could do to help support those groups so some in-need groups don't lose out.
You can.
I think we can make it as easy as possible. We can provide the rules of the road. We can provide technical assistance, but they still have to have the internal capacity to account for the dollars. And
Sure,
to
but I think
ensure-
any guidance that you can give would be huge. Because sometimes you don't know where to go or where to start. So even if there's a templates or a roadmap, and obviously they still need to account and have their receipts and do that side of it. But just knowing what that looks like, I think, can go a long way.
Okay. Maybe the reporting process itself, just like the way it's set up can be not super tedious. I really appreciate the way this is laid out and how it aligns with council goals. There's a couple questions. The top two priority projects, I absolutely agree with. I think providing some funds for the infrastructure along Boone's across from where we have the townhome project, but also near the other project we have the MOU with Metro for, because there has been lots of concern around safety and additional traffic. So I think that would go a long way, just like it will up on Stafford McVeigh in regards to the projects up there. So both of those for sure. Along with in the report talked about phase 2 of Boone's Ferry Road, but with the urban renewal area we have, eventually I think we'll have the funding from that to pay for the studies and ultimately the infrastructure that will be added for phase 2.
Currently, you're just about, by the end of this biennium, you'll be out of.
But eventually.
You'll be at the maximum indebtedness without actually, expanding the maximum indebtedness.
That's right.
And it's got to go through, the school district, the county, they have to agree.
Right.
And so where we are right now with it, you'll be out of funds.
So we'll need funds even to look into increasing the indebtedness.
There might be funds when the staging area is sold. Those funds will then be able to be reinvested back into the district. But until then, there's, I think I had it down to like $69,000, I think is what we have.
Okay, well, that's right there. That's close.
Out of 36 million, yeah.
Might have already spent that. Oops, what's that?
Okay, well, that's a good answer to that question. The ad hoc committee, just that noting the members of our tourism advisory committee, I'm not quite sure who's on the committee right now, but in the past, they have been some of the folks who might be on the boards of some of the organizations that might want the
Generally
funding.
was,
Yeah.
yes.
So we should,
Yeah, so you won't want to appoint those people to your
Right,
ad hoc
right.
committee. You won't want anybody on your ad hoc committee who is a potential applicant for the grant funds.
Right.
So we'll have to be thoughtful about that.
I would recommend adding a youth member from the leadership council to the grant committee as well. Especially less so for the tourism side, but also more so with a lot of the nonprofit groups in town who are helping the community, are school-based organizations helping families in the community, and I think the youth bring a good, students bring a good perspective. And if we need to keep a kind of ratio here of the voting members, it would be maybe keeping the council members, the council liaisons, if there's one or two non-voting, since I would approve the grants. No, right. And then it seems like there's general consensus around, if there is extra money, prioritizing safe routes to school, pathway
Absolutely.
projects, which of course has been, council goal. And we do have the study session later this month on stable funding, for these projects as well. So depending on, the cost of the North Shore, bridge and the funding there, but also depending on our conversation and what other funding mechanisms may be out there to accomplish these projects in addition to the money we've set aside in the CIP. Maybe we just keep flexible with, because I know there's only so much that Ms. Rooney can do with the projects within a certain time frame.
Can we throw $100 in?
I don't want to turn away money for that.
No. Can we throw $100 in for paving, just so Jeff is satisfied with this project? Or no?
I think Lakeview includes pavement.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I do have a
that's the
question.
feedback I had, yes.
You brought up a point about, schools and things like that. Is there any other additional funding as part of this ARPA plan for schools? I mean, of course, we're not the school board, but is there additional funding that's provided to schools?
They have their own fund, yes.
Yeah, so we'll make sure we don't overlap, right, where if the schools are getting money on that we.
Yeah, and that's why I think we focused on the part of the work that's the city's mission, which is making sure children can get safely to and from school, as opposed to trying to do their mission.
Right. And the good news, I think with the school funds were allocated based on a Title I. So, our district, for instance, while with more students receive less money than other districts with less students, but that have more students in need. So it's good in that way, more equitable. Councilor Mance.
Thank you, Mayor. This one is for Director Rooney. If we do the McVeigh South Shore study, we need to fund it. And I guess I'm asking for a crystal ball look from you to determine if that's something that you see happening. One thing that troubles me always is when we do some sort of survey, we look at it, and then it takes 10 years to fund, or it doesn't get funded, or it sits on a shelf. Would this then, because it's a council goal this year, would this mean that we would have a priority in the next biennium perhaps? Or I don't know how that would work.
So what I'd like to do with this project, with the corridor analysis basically,
Right.
is to answer a lot of questions that people have, which are what are the things we can do to deal with congestion, safety, all of that. Identify those items. And there may be some low-hanging fruit, if you
Okay.
will, not inexpensive, but easier things to implement as interim. Maybe we can't do the whole corridor in the next 10 years, but maybe we can do these spot things that might provide some level of improvement. And I think having a more cohesive corridor plan will help guide us as to how best to spend the money. There's all kinds of ideas out there what we should do. Many have significant impacts, and we want to talk about that and decide what is the trade-off and what we can do that has less impacts for right now, and maybe with some more, with funding in the next couple bienniums, as opposed to waiting for the big corridor project. Boones Ferry Road is a good example. That's about, phase 1, phase 2 is about a mile-long stretch, and we all know that took a long time. But that's a fairly significant overhaul of a corridor. You could do that with Stafford too, but it's about twice to 3 times as long as Boone's Ferry Road. So I think having some strategy in a corridor plan would be helpful for all of us, gives us a, no pun intended, roadmap for the future on that area. And we don't really have that right now.
I love it. I think that's absolutely fabulous. It also keeps it before council in one way or another, moving forward into future councils. So,
Exactly.
and that area is not going to become less congested at any time during the near future. So bravo. Thank you for the explanation. I appreciate
Thank you for
that.
the question.
Councilor Wendland?
I just want to make one comment on, we keep saying safe pathways to schools. I think we should say safe pathways because, there is multiple use. I mean, you see everybody out there, and I'm not discounting the student part, but I think it's safe pathways in Lake Oswego is a goal for everyone. And the other thing, to Councilor Mann's point, after we've been to several meetings with concerned citizens about McVeigh and about Stafford and everything else, I think this is a great use of money to figure out a game plan. And, I think it will prioritize, whether this is a bigger issue than we have in other parts of the town. It helps balance some of the priorities. But other than maybe they'll come up with some great things, but unless you do like a tunnel between Stafford and Dunthorpe, I'm not sure there's going to be a huge, you look at how thin and the easements to that area, it's a pretty tough project, but I think it will help us to illustrate the toughness of this situation. It will also help us, if we get it done soon enough, to help leverage information for the I-205 and also Stafford Triangle and some other projects that are before us, or concept projects, which I think that would be very helpful as well. So money well spent. If you can do it for that amount of money, I think it's a wise investment.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I agree. It's kind of, as we prioritize these pathway projects, and we've looked at let's start with certain projects around the schools and go from there. But I agree 100% that we have many projects all throughout town. I know now with the, like Councilor Ralph was talking about with the school bus problem, we're seeing that there's families that live within blocks even of the schools who are putting their kids on the bus because they don't feel safe walking to school, even though technically they are within the walking distance as defined by the district, or they're not even supposed to be taking the bus. So a definite work that we can do to make the community, the infrastructure safer. So, Ms. Bennett, do you feel like you have clear direction on?
I actually would love it if you had, I know Councilor Whoop started there, a motion sort of approving the categories and approving the formation of the ad hoc committee, which will have 2 non-voting council liaisons and a youth leadership council member.
Okay, okay, so.
I second it.
Yeah, is that, okay. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those, is that aye? I see Councilor Raffi mouths aye, okay. All right. All those opposed? Yeah. Same sign, all right. Unanimous, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Rooney. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Ms. Bennett. Okay, next up we have a legislative update. We'll welcome Ms. Thiesing to join us. Hello.
Hello.
Just when we thought we were done with the legislative updates.
I know.
It
doesn't fit.
I like how the link.
Oh, actually.
Yes, it was very
That
nice.
was great. Well done.
Yeah, it's only 81 pages long.
I don't know. I read
Just
the whole
saying.
thing. You didn't, council.
It's
Well,
81.
Mouse would work.
Oh, enthralling.
Very nice to
Well, if
me.
you read it,
They
I
were
can go quick
busy.
then too.
They were very busy.
Actually, it was Counselor Burdick who briefed me on it.
Yeah, it was just because this is like an easier one.
By hand.
Can you do, there you go.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Madison Thiesing, Assistant to the City Manager. For my presentation, I will be doing a final recap because you are correct. We have heard about what's been going on in the legislative session, and great to hear that you've read the league's report as well, so we can definitely make this a little bit quicker then. So as noted, last time I came, I presented on the session of where we were on opposing and advocating for those final weeks. Since then, obviously, session is closed, bills have been signed into law, and I'll be going over just the bills that directly impact city operations that are signed into law. So I'm not gonna get into everything. The league's report did a great job, so I'm just gonna highlight those that we flagged internally and then how that might impact with us. As a reminder, the 2021 legislative agenda that we created was based off of your 2021 adopted council goals. And under each, and this goes through in the council report, but under each goal, we had legislative priorities that focused on key areas for your work plan itself. So for example, under DEI, which was foster diversity, equity, inclusion in Lake Oswego, we had in your council goal work plan called out exploring contracts. So with that being said, in our legislative agenda, we focused on contracts, things that could increase diversity in our bidding process, things like that. So as I shared, I'll be only going over bills that directly impact city operations. I think impact sounds really ominous. Sometimes it can be positive, it can be negative, or it could be just neutral. So a lot of this stuff is changing just how our administrative processes go. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And a lot of times what I look at for the impact, it can be administrative. So we might be reviewing a new permit, for example, or fast tracking a permit, or financial if we're losing a revenue or regaining revenue sources, or if there's an exemption for property taxes, things like that. And then lastly, I would describe impact also as policy. So things like property tax exemption for affordable housing. That's a policy that happened at the state, which will trickle down to how we do our business. But however, much of what was passed into law actually just impacts us administratively for this session at least. A lot of what we covered, or excuse me, a lot of that went into being adopted, we actually had in place. So that's the really exciting thing. So I'm gonna dive in so we can keep moving along. So the first category based off of your council goals was safe and secure community. The first two I do wanna highlight, and one thing to note, policing was a big bucket for all of the legislative session. The first two items above that line, House Bill 3315 and 3124, both address homelessness. As we read it today, and we talked about this last time, we are in compliance with both of these. The big thing is that we are able to enact reasonable time, place, and manner regulations, which at this time we do believe applies to parks. And I know that was a question last time, so I just wanted to make sure we circled back on that. The league will be providing additional guidance on both of these two items and how to properly notice if you're doing a camp removal or things like that. So we're gonna be doing a dig a little deeper for legal review, but right now we are in compliance and this will not be necessarily changing how we do our business right now. Those that are below the line, we're actually already doing. So I just wanted to call these out because we have to change our administrative process just to make sure we're reporting it. But one of the things when I was talking to Captain Clay and Simon is these are best practices that we've been doing for a long time. We already have CPR training required for our police officers. We actually are already going through the accreditation process.
we actually already report use of force, but this, through the law, is going to say that we have to call it out in our policies that are existing for staff and internal. So that's a really great news. I think that's just a nod to our police department, but it just reinforces that commitment that we will continue to follow these rules as well as directions from the state as well, which aligns with the entire state and the Department of Public Safety Standards and Trainings. So moving on, the last one I did want to call out on this slide specifically was racism prevention and policing. So it's kind of a beefier one related to background checks. We are doing a lot of what is required, but one component is social media. And so we're going to be reviewing our standards of conduct and our social networking policies just to make sure we capture all that. But we are already doing the psychological exams. We're already doing background checks that apply and they align with what the state's asking for. So I just want to call that out, that one, because it sounds really big, and it is, and it's really important, but a lot of that stuff we are doing already.
What's the social media like for like personal social media?
Yeah, it's expression, and so we just want to, again, this is more of an internal look at how do we manage expression of speech. And then when we're reviewing applications, that's a component of it now, is to look at people's social media on their private side. But it's just something we just need to go through for our standards of conduct. And I believe police already has a social media policy, so we're just going to review that again. Okay. Any questions on this slide? Okay. So for business investment, oh, yes.
So when it comes to the local homeless ordinances, you said we are in compliance?
Yes, currently we are.
It might be helpful, because I've had a lot of questions from citizens to say, what are our policies? And I don't know if there's a next issue of hello. And that might be helpful to say, hey, this is what the state law is, this is our ordinance, and this is how we're handling it. Because a lot of people, they don't know, and they come to say, what are we supposed to be doing, or what can I do, that type of thing. So that might be helpful for citizens.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. Luckily, I'm also in charge of communication, so I can look at that. Exactly, okay. And it is a question I know that has come up a couple times on council distribution, so we'll definitely try to find a way to weave that story in. So moving along, business investment. For our legislative agenda, we focused largely actually on COVID relief related to businesses and jobs. The two that I wanted to call out specifically are the residential eviction protections and the commercial tenant grace period extension. Both of those we talked about last time. Both were signed into law or into bills. And actually, they don't have necessarily a direct impact to city operations. However, by giving people grace and protections, it's saving our local economy and property tax base for us, or that it's allowing people to pay utility bills. So it's that ecosystem of a local economy that's why that piece was important to call out. So moving along, so diversity, equity, inclusion, like I said, for this one, we actually focused more on the contracting piece. So for House Bill 3055, this is one that increases our contract amount that can be awarded for certified emerging small businesses. And again, this is one that we're just gonna review our contracting our policies, and that's something we'll do administratively internally. And then similarly, Senate Bill 420, the community benefit contract, is it's allowing entities, public entities, contracting entities, i.e. a city, to be able to adopt a resolution or ordinance that allows public benefit contracts for certain projects. And public benefit contracts are contracts that happen with developers, and you basically say in the contract before you go out for bid that you're gonna require local procurements or local hires, or you need to dedicate a certain space in that building to have community access, things like that. So both of those are big contracting pieces, but again, more in administrative, not necessarily changing how we do our business right now.
Real quick.
Yes.
Councilor Raff has a question on the previous slide.
Oh,
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Madison, the first slide, community safety and security. So going a little further with what Councilor Wedman was saying. So as I'm sure everybody knows, the majority of our community is very concerned about the proliferation of homelessness and panhandling in our city. I know that in certain respects, our hands are tied, but I would like us as a council to start thinking proactively on how we protect our citizens and those who live here to make sure that everyone is indeed safe. Everyone is indeed safe from harassment, and we can protect people's property values and property. So I think maybe that's something, I don't know how we do that, Martha. I don't know what we need to do, but I'm going to just come out and say that we have a lot of citizens that are getting really scared and concerned, and we should look after them.
Yeah, so we can bring back sort of a study session conversation with you about at least homeless camping. I always like to remind folks that panhandling is protected free speech nationwide. So there is very limited things that we can do with folks who are panhandling unless they are doing something else. So if they are aggressively panhandling, if they're blocking traffic. And the best thing all of us as people can do is to give to the charities that support folks who are trying to get back on their feet and not give to panhandlers.
Okay. Thank you.
any questions or comments about the contracts? Okay, great. Next one is climate impact. So House Bill 2021 is the 100% clean energy. This was not the PG bill that we had previously talked about. They both were going alongside. We supported both. One thing to note about this one is it aligns with our climate action goals. So it's just an alignment of our goals with the state goals, and will provide hopefully funding in the future and different policy options and programs that will come out of it. Statewide bag ban definition change, we already have that, so we're gonna update our definition to make sure it aligns with now the state, because the state has now said we're not gonna have multiple definitions, we're gonna have one. And this is one that we are just gonna need to update our adopted ordinance already. And then the last one is the recycling modernization, and this is something we're gonna be working with Republic Services on to be in compliance. There's parts of the bill, things about education for residents, making sure multifamily housing has proper containers. And then there's a part about reimbursement for these efforts. I want to make sure that we're in alignment with Republic Services, as well as it's going into effect on January 1. We have a new sustainability program manager starting at the end of the month, and so it will actually be part of their workload, and I'll just work with them to make sure we cover all three before they go into effect as well.
Councilor Mboop has a question.
Yes.
Is the timeline? What's the timeline for the 100% clean energy?
You know, I actually don't have that date on me. I think I'd have to look it up.
Yes, and the other thing is that, can you expand on the statewide bag ban definitional change?
It's just how we define the bag itself, so the recyclable bag. So it's what we have right now in the city, and you have that 5%, or I think it's 5 cents. No, 10
No,
cents?
10.
10 cents. I'm not the sustainability expert, clearly. So the 10 cent, it's how we define the recyclable bag and use of the bag. We have our own definition. Tigard has a definition. Hillsborough has a definition. By creating this statewide, we are all throughout the state going to use the same definition, and that's the only component that we have to change.
Oh.
So there's no longer confusion from the retailer side, essentially.
Thank you.
Right. So it doesn't, I think the big difference is that the statewide definition doesn't include some of those heavier weighted plastic bags that we precluded, but the state allows as a reusable bag. So, like those shoe bags and whatnot. You know. It says by 2050. The 100%,
2050. There we go.
But it's 80% by 2030. It's like ramped up, yeah.
Do you have your report in front of you? That's probably
Yes,
good.
this is, yes.
Thinks
Yeah,
I should
did
have put
not
it
know
off the
that.
70 pages. So for those three, like I said, our sustainability program manager is going to be starting at the end of the month. So those will be three that we want to make sure we're in compliance for, especially the statewide bag ban and the recycling modernization, because those are happening sooner. So up next is city operations. So for your council goal, it touches on investments, public trust, and infrastructure. And so for city operations, these are the three that I wanted to call out for. First one being 2560, electronic participation in public meetings. So this was something so it's requiring that public meetings have electronic or a virtual participation option. And that's for all public meetings provided by a public agency. So this includes city council, planning commission, anything like that. And the way we've been discussing it is currently we have hybrid meetings. However, post-COVID, phone and email will suffice that electronic option. We also previously, again, as a good practice, always offer computer access before meetings and try to accommodate any needs. So this is, again, just something that we will continue as is, but at least formalize in a policy and make sure all the other boards and commissions are following it as well.
So when you say, so all of our boards and commissions need to
Have
it
a
goes
electronic
down
or
to that
virtual option.
point. Okay.
It could be a phone.
It could be a phone. And that's how we are interpreting it right now, is that phone and email could be applied to that electronic option. And if someone chooses not to use that, I know Carrie in the past has also set up a computer for someone in another room if they didn't want to be in the
Right.
setting. So we also have some flexibility to always accommodate what the need is too.
Yeah. I think we're in some of these rooms here will eventually be set up as we're moving in and getting all the technology geared up for this more advanced hybrid meeting where it can be, like we're right now, which is great.
Yes. 2344, I think we talked about last time. It's the requirements for labeling wipes and saying they're not they're not flushable. This one I was calling out actually because it's really positive for our financial look on wastewater systems. So by preventing flushables, we're actually hopefully going to be saving staff time, emergency staff time, DEQ reporting, and that happens after these spills. So again, impact can also be a positive thing. And then the last one is the stored water transfers. This is not necessarily that we're going to have additional work, but it provides us access to critical stored water, which we have the rights to without having to buy additional water rights if we need access to this. And this is something that Tigard's been a part of as well. So for parks, related to the Christmas tree bill, which was a big funding bill, this is actually, I wanted to call this out because it's a Senator Wagner ARPA project. So there will be funding to the Hillsdale to Lake Oswego Trail, which was something that Senator Wagner was promoting. So I just wanted to give a shout out for that one. Last one second to last one, transportation. So 2080 is increasing EV capacity in new construction, which is saying you have to have X percentage of electrical vehicle charging stations at multifamily housing, mixed-use housing, and special development areas. This is not going to necessarily require a policy change for us, but it will change our building code because it's changing the state building code. So we will just be administratively checking this now with these types of building developments. And then one thing I did want to note, slightly separate than the legislative agenda, is that there's a lot of work happening at the state with the 205 tolling project. And I know it came up earlier related to transportation. Director Rooney will be providing updates and engaging council in the coming months on that. So I just wanted to call out that because I know transportation has been talked about, that project has been talked about at the state level as well with ODOT, so. And then the last one, in your council goals, we call it quality of life, but it's essentially how we plan for future growth and development. And I don't want anyone to read this as these are going to impact our quality of life. It just kind of falls under that bucket of managing growth and how our community looks. In this last year, housing and land use were big topics in the legislature. It showed both in what laws were passed, but also funding options that were provided. And many of these changes ended up falling with planning, building, community development in that area. So again, it's not to dismiss other components of the quality of life. This is just the three that I thought rose to a discussion based off of impact, of course. So the first one being the emergency shelter siting. This is just an administrative impact. If someone comes forward with a shelter request, it is saying that we would allow them based off of, basically it's a fast track administrative process for approving emergency shelters when an emergency is underway. The religious owned affordable housing siting and property exemption, it's a preemption for local zoning to allow affordable housing on certain locations. So again, if it's a religiously owned, we will be approving that. When I talked to Director Siegel, he said that it could streamline review process, but also prevent some of the land use appeals, which again, streamline the process, but that is the trade-off, is that we won't be doing those appeals anymore. This is related also to SB 8, which I know has been talked about a couple times. So again, same idea that it is a fast track for affordable housing to be happening. And then the last one, surplus land reporting, it's just an administrative impact. We'll report it annually to the state, and then we actually don't have surplus land, so we will be reporting, no, but the administrative time to report, no.
Yeah. Let us know how long that report is.
Yes.
Because I think it's going to be void of information.
So some of those, it just takes staff time, and so it's something we will start to do annually now. And then that's actually it. So are there any questions or comments?
And we do have Senator Wagner is going to come to an upcoming meeting. So if we do have any, questions after we read through the 84-page report, we can save them for
Yes.
Senator Wagner.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
The last one.
The last one.
Until next session.
But it'll be a short session.
It will be a short session.
Okay. Next up, we have the consent agenda. On the consent agenda tonight are the findings, conclusions, and order for AP 21-02, LU 20-0032, which was the appeal we heard on the DRC's Commission's approval of a RID variance on Lake Haven Drive. We also have approval of meeting minutes, June, and 2 meetings in July. And then we have a permanent right-of-way easement for road purposes there along Childs Road by the Stevens Meadows and Cooks Butte parking and trailhead. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda?
Second?
Councilor Burdick, is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, unanimous. Next, we have just for council approval, the appointment, let me just pull up my thing here real quick.
Move to approve Resolution 2131.
Thank you, Councilor Woodland. Is there a second?
Second?
This is to approve Rex Buchanan to the Planning Commission to replace Commissioner Semler, who has had to step down. We appreciate Commissioner Semler's service. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Next up is information from council. Is there anyone that has anything to report? No? Okay, well, I'll just real quick, I'll report kind of what we've been talking about. And we had a recess in August, but the regional meetings were generally still taking place. And so at MPAC, we've been, and it kind of ties into some of what we're just discussing here tonight about the houselessness throughout the region, but the supportive housing services, measure, we've discussed this before, continues to be, an issue here in Clackamas County, Washington County, Multnomah County. They have funded the implementation of this program. This is something we are all paying for. and yet has not been implemented yet in Clackamas County. So when we look at why houses, people facing what they're facing, I mean, programs, the type of programs this would fund would be the kind of programs that get people out of that cycle when they're, living a transient lifestyle and getting, charged with crimes related, to that lifestyle, whether it's like fair hopping or trespassing, things like that. And just in that constant cycle, case managers and programs that help get them out of that, and back into the regular life. So until we fund these programs, we'll continue to see this issue and see it get worse. So I'm hoping that people in our community, if this is something they're concerned about, they should be concerned about why the Clackamas County Commission is not funding this program that we are all paying for, and it's a big issue. So I'm not trying to be dramatic about it, but I just can't stress that it's really important, and it's not being funded here.
So are you saying that Clackamas County commissioners have money? They're
Yeah.
not spending it?
Yeah, they're going in circles, lots of excuses, and the other counties have figured it out, but we just can't figure it out here in Clackamas County. And so the problem continues to get worse, and it's something that would make a really big difference, and not just, and also preventing, further houselessness. I mean, these needs exist right now. I mean, 2 years from now, there's also that issue that, as we're seeing in so many industries, workforce shortage. So the folks that would work within this industry, I mean, there's lots of money going out the door in the other two counties, and they are hiring, the folks that do these jobs. So by the time Clackamas gets around to it, I mean, there will literally just not be people to do the work. So we're going to face that, and it's just going to further delay, implementation. So we continue to press. I mean, this is a concern for all the cities here in Clackamas, and so we're still pressing the commission to move forward with implementation. Otherwise, I mean, that's pretty much it that's going on in the regional table. I mean, we did talk about kind of the regional mobility plan, and one thing what I learned from that was that Clackamas has more people that leave Clackamas every day for work than the other two counties. So like more people that live in Multnomah County and work within Multnomah County, and the same with Washington County. But Clackamas has, I think it's like 66% of the people that live here actually travel to either Washington or Multnomah counties to work. So lots of transportation remains, such a big issue between. We did hear a good update from TriMet. They are increasing service on several of our routes here within Lake Oswego, and they've also gone back to increasing some of their service, and they really seem open for more feedback and things they're working on with the electrification of their bus fleet, modernization of their shelters, et cetera. So it is good to see some improvement. I mean, it's been a huge issue here in Clackamas, and it's not just unique to Lake Oswego. All the other jurisdictions, face that as well. Yeah, okay. That's all I have. All right, Ms. Bennett?
Only, did you cover I-205 and I just was zoned out?
Oh.
So,
Say that again? What?
I was asking if he covered I-205.
Oh, I-205.
So the other thing that we're working on, getting a presentation to all of you, and I'm sorry Director Rooney left, is to hear the latest from ODOT on the I-205 tolling project. We keep hearing that the only two alternatives that are going to go into the environmental assessment are no tolling and tolling from just on the east side of exit 3 across the bridge to exit 10 or 11, depending. So obviously that's pretty significant for concern for us, for Tualatin, for Wilsonville, for West Lynn, and for Oregon City about the potential for diversion. So stay tuned. We're going to try to get them here, but we may need you guys to weigh in with a formal comment letter sooner rather than later.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I mean, that is a concern shared by, again, the other cities within Clackamas County, and they have made it abundantly clear. We have had discussion at the various meetings with these ODOT representatives, I mean, multiple times. They also did lots of public engagement, and they heard all these same comments.
So why is it even a consideration? Because I haven't heard
It's a
one
great
person, except for a bureaucrat that we hired from some city, say that we need it, and everybody is saying that we don't.
I know.
So I don't understand what the disconnect is. I really don't. Because
Yeah,
and
I'm not
this has been a-
defending it, but the argument that's being made is first that the legislation that allocated funding to I-205 required them to look at tolling the new infrastructure. And the other is that the tolls are required to pay for a portion of the infrastructure. Please
I
don't,
understand
please don't
that.
represent that I'm not agreeing with that argument. I'm just saying that that's been the reasoning. I guess the frustrating part is that not only have you been consistent as jurisdictions, but we've offered other alternatives that should be evaluated as part of the study, and they are repeatedly rejected. So it's not that you've gone in just saying not this, you've also said not this, but maybe this, and
Right.
and yet that's still not under consideration. So, I mean, it's time probably to
Raise the flag.
well, and perhaps think about who else we should be talking to, because clearly ODOT staff feel that their hands are tied for some reason. So, and I don't know why, but it's time to, we'll come back to you with a
When is
proposal.
Senator Wagner coming? No, I'm serious.
No,
I don't know.
I
We're
think that's a good,
scheduling it
that's a
in
good
the
option.
fall.
Yeah.
In the fall.
Is that before any decisions are made, or do we need to be?
That's why I say I wish that Director Rooney was still here, because she has a better handle on the calendar, but we'll get you that information
Yeah.
so that you know.
Okay, because I'd be totally supportive if you want to draft a letter sooner than later, and that we can follow up with one every other day or something,
Okay,
so.
okay. Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thank you all so much for a very good meeting, and we are adjourned. Look at that.
Well done.